So tell me, Yankee, why did you come to this horrible place?
Leon, long time no see.
Let's just say, looking for someone.
Been a long time, comrade.
Then come, Sancho Panza. Let us rescue the Princess Dulcinea.
You can hurt yourself.
Hey, that was my lance.
My name's Leon. I'm under the President's order to rescue you.
Okay, Leon.
Perfect. The big cheese.
Over here, Dragon John.
I'll take the girl.
I'm never turning into one of them. Never.
What do you think, Leon? People can change, right?
It's okay to be afraid, you know. But you can't run. You gotta keep moving forward. We will beat this. Together. This time, it can be different. It has to.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
Resident Evil 4.
Name a more influential title in the survival horror genre. Well, if it's not Silent Hill 2, it's Capcom's fourth entry in their best-selling franchise, Resident Evil 4. First released on January 11th, 2005 for the Nintendo GameCube, it not only revolutionized survival horror, but also set a new standard for third-person shooters. It's celebrated for its gameplay and graphics and is frequently cited as one of the best video games of all time. And now we're revisiting its greatness 20 years later. The story of RE4's development begins all the way back in 1999, when producer Shinji Mikami stated that a Resident Evil game was in the works for the, at the time, new PlayStation 2. Directed by Hideki Kamiya, it was to be a cool and stylish action game with gothic overtones and a dynamic camera system that set it apart from the previous titles. Mikami, however, felt that this project was becoming a little too actiony to fit within the Resident Evil world, and eventually convinced the staff to make it its own thing. As we all know, this version of the game ended up as the first Devil May Cry, released in August of 2001. But with that out of the way, Capcom was now back to square one. Enter Resident Evil 3.5, early iterations of RE4 that were shown off in the years before its release, but ultimately never saw the light of day. The first of these revisions was announced in November 2002, and featured Leon becoming infected with the progenitor virus as he struggles to survive Umbrella's headquarters in Europe. It is known as the Fog version in reference to the Black Fog creature which would have been responsible for the infection. The second and perhaps most well-known variant is the Hookman version, showcased at E3 2003. The plot involved Leon contracting a bizarre disease and fighting off an assortment of paranormal enemies, one of which was the titular Hookman. The game was to feature the now familiar over-the-shoulder camera and QuickTime events, but also contained otherworldly elements like flashbacks and hallucinations, the latter of which was based on another story concept, this one also starring a young girl and a dog alongside Leon. That version wasn't completely abandoned either, however, as its premise was later repurposed and used as a foundation for 2005's Haunting Ground. 3 failed attempts, and it seemed this game was getting nowhere. So Capcom decided the only way to get the project off the ground was to reinvent the series. In a 2004 interview with producer Hiroyuki Kobayashi, he states, "We wanted to give the gamers something new. In the past installments, we were stuck in the cookie-cutter RE mold. We had to break those shackles holding us down before we came up with something new." This is where the RE4 we all know and love truly begins. With Mikami taking over as director, production of the final version was now in full swing. He aimed to move away from what he felt was repetitive gameplay and pushed for many revisions, including an entirely new story that was written in just 3 weeks. By shifting focus from pure survival horror to something more action-oriented, Resident Evil 4 made an extremely bold move. Changing genres can either make or break your entire series going forward, and luckily, in this case, it worked out.
I remember when I first picked up the game, I had a really hard time putting it down because, yowza, this game is so much fun.
I fell in love with the game instantly. Like, everything is just so right.
It definitely felt like a game that was designed to keep you hooked, and kept me hooked it did.
The year is 2004. U.S. agent Leon S. Kennedy is sent to rescue the president's daughter, Ashley Graham, from a remote Spanish village where she's been kidnapped by a cult known as the Los Illuminados. Upon arrival, Leon discovers the villagers have been infected with Las Plagas, a mind-controlling parasite. After fighting through the village and finding an unlikely ally in former Illuminados researcher Luis Serra, Leon makes his way to the church where Ashley's being held. They manage to escape, but not before cult leader Osmond Sadler reveals his plan to use her to manipulate the president and distribute the parasite across the entire world. The mission takes the two through a castle where Ashley's captured once again, and finally to an island facility where Leon is confronted by his former colleague Jack Krauser, who orchestrated the kidnapping. With a little extra help from Ada Wong, a spy from his past, Leon defeats Sadler and he and Ashley make their getaway on a jet ski as the island explodes behind them. If that doesn't sound like an action-packed adventure, I don't know what does. The story and presentation of RE4 is absolute cinema. The creepy elements of horror, the over-the-top badassery of a spy flick, and the cheesy dialogue of a kung fu parody film.
Your right hand comes off?
One thing you'll notice right away is that this game's structure is much more linear than the previous three. Unlike those, which mostly consisted of exploring and backtracking through different rooms in one big area, here each of the three main sections is broken down into smaller sequences, which feel like their own self-contained levels. Now, there are moments where you will need to backtrack due to a locked door or for special items, but most of the time it's a straight shot from point A to point B. Honestly, you could almost go through the whole game without even having to look at the map. This structure also gives you a better sense of progression and where you are on subsequent playthroughs. But what truly set RE4 apart from its predecessors was its innovative gameplay. First, there was the change from fixed camera angles to an over-the-shoulder perspective. And though it still utilized the classic tank controls, it was done in such a way that you hardly noticed them. So while there's still a bit of restriction in play, it feels surprisingly freeing. Once you get the hang of it, you're running from place to place and blasting through hordes of enemies like it's second nature.
Initially, while playing the game on PS2, I thought it felt a bit clunky, but after revisiting the touched-up HD version on PS4, I got used to the controls very quickly.
This game also has, without a doubt, the best inventory management system in the series bar none. Unlike the limited item slots from previous games, RE4 introduced the attaché case, which allowed players to strategically sort their items as well as upgrade to add even more space. People often joke that half the game consists of you just playing Tetris in the inventory, but honestly, that's part of the fun. This new system also eliminated the need for the storage containers found in RE1 through 3. With key items and treasures now having their own dedicated space completely separate from the attaché case, all you had to worry about were weapons and health. And speaking of weapons, let's talk about how you acquire them. While there are a few just lying around for you to grab, most of the time you'll be buying them from a mysterious salesman known simply as the Merchant.
What are you buying?
I remember having so much fun with the shop mechanic and all the different kinds of weapons you can get. The Merchant is just an absolute treasure.
Thank you.
The best part about this mechanic is the incredible replayability it offers. No two playthroughs of this game are ever the same. The first time you dive in, you're not really going to understand what you should be doing, which guns are the best, when you should be upgrading them so you don't end up going broke. It's tough to know on your first run. But every time you play again, you start picking up little tips and tricks that make things easier. Plus, the sheer number of weapons available opens up so many possibilities, adding to that replay value. And here's the thing, everyone's experience is going to be unique. With such a varied arsenal, each player can approach the game their own way. You might discover that a gun others dismiss works perfectly for your style. For example, I love using the TMP in the earlier parts of the game, but you might find it more useful later on. I'm a fan of the Red 9, while you may feel more comfortable with something like the Blacktail. It's all about personalizing your playthrough and doing what feels right for you.
The only thing I didn't really like was the QuickTime events, as they kind of felt dated, honestly.
I mentioned it briefly earlier, but this game is quite notorious for its dreaded QuickTime events. Now, there are moments when they fit in pretty well. When done correctly, they can be just the right length, easy enough to pull off, but you still have to keep your eyes on the screen. One of the most infamous examples is the first Krauser fight, which plays out entirely in a cutscene packed with QTEs. This game really keeps you on your toes. You can't afford to look away for even a second. I totally get why that can be frustrating for a lot of players, but honestly, it's not that bad. Let's see, inventory, weapons, QTEs... What am I forgetting? Ah, yes. Her. If there's one thing most fans of this game can agree on, it's their feelings toward Ashley Graham. Leon's job is to get the president's daughter home safely, so naturally, much of RE4 is indeed an escort mission. This is often considered one of the weaker aspects of the game, but it's not because her AI is bad. In fact, she's basically glued to your side unless you tell her to wait. When you aim your weapon, she drops to the ground so you don't accidentally hit her, and there are even spots for her to hide when things get really intense. The real issue is that you're often forced into scenarios where she can be easily grabbed or killed by enemies, which can really disrupt the flow of the gameplay. Plus, her high-pitched cries can get pretty annoying after a while.
As much as I did like Ashley in the original, escorting her with those voice lines was very obnoxious.
It's moments like these that tend to stick in people's minds when they think about Ashley. But as far as escort missions go, it's not handled that poorly overall. I've definitely seen worse. RE4 is one of those games that's tough to pin down when it comes to why everyone loves it so much. It's really a mix of everything. Great gameplay, memorable character portrayals, witty writing, and even the visuals.
I remember thinking that the graphics looked incredible for this generation, that I still think look incredible to this day.
The vibe of this game is just so different from the earlier Resident Evil titles. Sure, you have similar locations, the village that feels like Raccoon City, the castle that's reminiscent of the Spencer Mansion, and the island laboratory, but it all feels fresh and unique, just familiar enough to keep you grounded, yet shifted enough to stand on its own.
When Resident Evil 4 first came out, I was only 10 years old, and horror games were not my thing. However, the GameCube was my jam, and that game was the bread.
Prior to playing RE4 for the first time, I had only played a bit of the original Resident Evil on PS1. But even I knew RE4 was a very unique title in that it changed up the series' formula and did stuff way differently than its three iconic predecessors.
I first played RE4 during the latter half of my high school years. I can't recall exactly how it all went down, but I must have been looking up Resident Evil stuff for whatever reason, and that's when I saw Leon. You can probably guess where this is going. So I picked up a copy at GameStop along with the RE1 remake, and though I enjoyed that one as well, it was of course 4 that won me over. Not just because of Leon, but also the other characters, the way it controlled, the atmosphere. I just loved everything about it from the start. It was definitely a game that made me step out of my comfort zone. Before that, I was mainly into mascot platformers on PlayStation like Spyro, Crash, or Ratchet & Clank. Those games were colorful and vibrant, with a hint of kid-friendly edginess. There was nothing really scary or violent about the games I liked. Besides maybe Killer Instinct on SNES, I hadn't really experienced anything that felt so realistic and brutal before.
It's thanks to Resident Evil 4 where I decided to try out other horror franchises that I would also fall in love with, which include Silent Hill, Dead Space, and Amnesia.
It sparked my interest in games beyond what I was used to. Without it, I probably wouldn't love Uncharted or Mass Effect or Horizon as much as I do. Originally touted as a GameCube exclusive, Resident Evil 4 has since gone on to become one of the most ported games in history. In a famous 2002 interview, Shinji Mikami claimed that if RE4 ever landed on a console other than the GameCube, he'd cut his own head off. This bold statement has since become a meme, and Mikami even poked fun at it in his next game, God Hand, featuring a chihuahua humorously named Mikami's Head. The first of these many ports was the PS2 version, which released back in October 2005. This version is most well known for introducing the Separate Ways campaign, a side story featuring Ada Wong as the main character. Other platforms it launched on include PC, Wii, iOS, Zeebo, PS3, Xbox 360, Android, PS4, Xbox One, Nintendo Switch, and Oculus Quest 2. Then there's the RE4 HD project, a visual overhaul mod which enhances the original experience with high-resolution textures, improved 3D models, and optional gameplay tweaks. By 2022, there were about 15 ways to play this game, and we were about to get another.
As far as the remake was concerned, well, I wasn't that surprised about it getting made. As great as the original was, there was definitely room for improvement.
When I heard RE4 was getting a remake, I was kind of skeptical. I didn't really think it needed a remake.
When I heard that the game was getting remade, I was like, oh god, Capcom, what the hell are you doing? Please stop it. Stop it, please!
In June of 2022, as part of PlayStation's State of Play, we got our first look at Resident Evil 4's remake, and people were hyped, cautiously. After the mixed reception on RE3's remake in 2020, there was no telling how this could go. Would it be a faithful adaptation? Would it keep everything we loved about the original while also putting a modern spin on things? Would it lean more into the horror aspect as the trailer depicted? There were so many questions, and in the months that followed, we would get some answers.
My biggest question was, how do you remake something that was already pretty much perfect?
This was the chance to touch up the controls even more, give it some flair, give the environments more of a dense, creepy feel, and it was obvious some of the characters were going to get changed up too.
A second and third trailer were shown in October that same year and February 2023, which gave us a closer look at the gameplay as well as characters like Ashley, Luis, and Ada. This came with its own share of controversies, but for the most part, people really loved what they saw. And when the big day finally arrived...
I don't know what I was worried about, because this remake is fantastic.
I actually really loved it. In fact, I think it's on par with the original game.
If I had to pick between the original and the remake, I'm actually going to give it to the remake.
Of course it was a hit. Minor character and lore discrepancies aside, Capcom really put the work in to give us a great final product. In fact, it's currently the fastest selling game in the series and third best reviewed, topped only by the original and Code Veronica. But what exactly did this remake do to make itself stand out? Well, for starters, the visuals are stunning. In addition to reimagining iconic locations from the original, there are also brand new areas that replace parts that have been left out. These can either be seen as better or worse, depending on how you look at it. Regardless, it's all very pretty and incredibly detailed. As far as gameplay is concerned, gone are those old school tank controls, replaced with much more fluid all-around movement that works better for a modern third-person shooter. The knife can now be used to parry attacks, including the chainsaw, which gives it a whole new purpose outside of being a box cutter. Just keep in mind that this comes with durability, so you'll need to repair and upgrade it alongside your other weapons. Speaking of, the shop system is updated as well. Here, the merchant acts as not only a salesman, but a quest giver. These requests range from shooting blue medallions to catching a big fish, and completing them will earn you a separate currency to trade for special items. There's also a new crafting mechanic, which allows you to make your own ammo and grenades via gunpowder. Oh, and guess what? The storage is back. While the attaché case remains, the old item box has returned to give you even more space to store unneeded weapons or health. QuickTime events are also a lot more tolerable this time around. They no longer happen during normal cutscenes, so you can actually sit back and watch them play out without an unneeded layer of anxiety. So, what about Ashley? If you ask me, and I bet a lot of other fans would agree, Miss Graham got a serious upgrade. Personality-wise, she's way more likable and well-rounded, with a fair share of witty remarks during gameplay.
What can I say? Dogs like me.
Her voice in general is softer, but her cries for help are terrifying. adding much more urgency to the situation.
And I was so glad that Ashley in this remake was so much better than the original Ashley. Like, she was so much more likable. I actually wanted to rescue her.
When it comes to how the escort gameplay is handled, though, it's kind of a mixed bag. On one hand, she no longer has her own health bar, so you don't have to worry about healing her if she gets hit by an enemy's weapon or caught in a bear trap. The commands work a little differently too. Instead of the simple wait and follow, she either sticks close to you or you can tell her to give you some space during combat. The issue with this is that she's still out in the open and vulnerable, and with hiding spots being pretty much non-existent, the risk of her getting grabbed by enemies is a bit higher. So it's a give and take. I think for everything that's been lost from the original, the remake makes up for it by adding something new that's just as good. For example, we may not get this.
No thanks, bro.
But we do get this.
Nighty-night. Nights.
Leon's still the same way too cool for his own good secret agent we all know and love, doing those unnecessary backflips and sitting like he's Jin Kazama.
To me, the two versions together make a complete whole. You've got the cheesiness from the original and the updated gameplay from the remake. If you play these two back to back, I think you'll get some very satisfying stuff no matter which one you start out with.
They know fans care about their franchises, their games, everything. If the fans want it, Capcom really delivers.
Both versions, whether it's the original or the remake, are still A+ games that any fan of action or survival horror games should pick up and play at least once.
So whether you play the original or the remake, you really can't go wrong with Resident Evil 4.
When it comes down to it, Resident Evil 4 is more than just a game that revolutionized a genre. It's a cultural landmark that changed the way we think about gaming as a whole. From its bold departure from fixed camera angles to its perfect blend of action and horror, it showed us that sometimes taking risks pays off in the biggest way possible. 20 years later and we're still talking about it, still playing it, and still quoting those corny one-liners. The fact that Capcom was able to capture lightning in a bottle not once, but twice with the remake, just shows how special this game truly is. Whether you're a longtime fan who remembers booting it up on the GameCube for the first time, or someone who just picked up the remake within the last couple years, RE4 has something for everyone, and absolutely deserves to be called a masterpiece. Thank you so much for watching, guys. As always, a huge shout out to everyone who participated, Mel for the thumbnail art, and all my patrons and members as well. As always, if you are new, don't forget to subscribe for more casual gaming content, and I will see you next time. Until then, this is Miharu, signing off.